Oh, you know what? Let me go back to the homework slide here. So you probably sense we're a little bit behind. I'm not worried. We still are able to take the quiz on Greek art on Tuesday. So for homework, I don't have anything new for you. We would basically, we want to get through 21. And so that was the homework for yesterday. So if you got that done, great. If not, make sure that you get that done. Okay. So we're going to be focusing on that work that you did yesterday. So remember yesterday, we were focusing on these different themes that we see at the Acropolis. And so what I was able to do is compile your information, which also made it so that I know next year how to make this even better. So instead of putting it all separate, putting it all together. And so group 3, right? You found this research information for us on the Parthenon. So this is the kind of stuff that you can write into your note takers based on these different concepts of Athenian pride, the struggle of balance between order and reason and chaos, military power and strength, as well as political significance. Okay, so I don't want to necessarily read it verbatim to you, and you can see some of those major things, but you also have all of these links, right, to the agenda. Is that the Parthenon, right? The Parthenon was built by whom? Who built the Parthenon? Maybe some group 3 people can help me. Who built it? Who built it? I have to go back and look at my group numbers. Who's going to help me out? It's on the screen. Who can help me? Yes. Now, Pericles was the main administrator, right? But would he be the one who paid for it himself? Who paid for it? Who did Pericles get the money from? Does anyone know? He just paid out of his own pocket? Anyone know? Yes. He taxed the people. So the Athenians were taxed, so the people of Athens were taxed, but also they taxed other city-states because the Athenians had a great army and they could go and fight for Sparta or Corinth or any other major city. And so they would take money from other towns as well. So they were able to accumulate the riches, not only to build the Parthenon, but to rebuild the entire Acropolis structure, right? And so there is a sense of political significance there, right? But also Athenian pride. This is so big, and the people paid for it, right? That they had, of course, a lot of pride in it being built, but also pride in their patron goddess. Yes. Yes. Okay. It's all supposed to show their greatness and their triumphs over whom? Who did they conquer? Who did Athenians conquer? Yeah, Sadie. The Persians, right? And so it's all about the Persians. So military strength, right? Military strength is there in the colossal sculpture of Athena on the inside. And she's shown, and we'll talk about her, we'll see her again. She's shown as a victor, right? She's shown in her military garb. Now, probably the one thing that they didn't talk about was that struggle of balance of order, reason, and chaos. The only thing I would add there is all of the decoration on the Parthenon talks about that, right? And we'll see countless examples of that as we move through. Okay, so something up with my animation. So on the Parthenon, there's sculptures and decoration all over the place. So the first area we're going to look at is this triangular pediment that's on 2 sides of the structure. Okay, so group 3 focused on those pediments. And so on one side that is in very bad condition, we don't really have, we have like little remnants of them, and they're in 2 different museums in the world. We have the contest between Athena and Poseidon. So we already talked about this story. Remember, there was a person named Erechtheus, and he was kind of the judge. And he had a contest between Athena and Poseidon. And so it's all illustrated in that pediment on the west side. Okay, so in Athenian pride, right, it depicts Athena as the victor, right? And that's, of course, where their patron goddess becomes, right? That's where she comes from. Now, in the sculptures themselves, there is symbols of like dusk and dawn, and there's imagery of chaos. Notice how active the poses are of all of those figures, right? They're not just relaxing, they're not stiff and formal, they're engaged, there's energy, there's movement, there's action, okay? The military element of it, of course, we have Athena here in the very middle, and we see the action between her and Poseidon. And then there's a lot of symbolism of Helos and the chariot showing their military strength. And that once again is representational of the victory over Persia. So once again, this slide is up there for you. We don't have an image of this on the image set, so I want to kind of move on to what we do have. So on the east side, this is where we have the best examples of the pediment sculptures. If you want to go see these, you're going to need to go to London and go to the British Museum. Okay. So one of the things that you might notice from this side and this side is how they have organized the space. Okay. So we'll talk about the other elements here in a second. How do they fit all of those figures into a kind of a strange shape? A triangle is a hard thing to organize. Think about that's a compositional nightmare. So what did they do to make sure those things fit really well? What's happening in the center? What do you think? Yeah.
Athena being born from Zeus.
Right? This is Athena sprouting out of the head. Of course, this one doesn't really look like the head of Zeus. And so he is the main god, so he's really big. So we have Hyriactic scale, and he's sitting on his throne. On the other side, we have Athena and Poseidon, and they're standing erect, and they're gods, and so they're enormous, right? And so they're at the highest point of the triangle. And then what happens to the figures as they move to the sides? Visually, what are they doing? Right, so we've got shorter figures who are probably human. And then we have people who are starting to sit in like chairs. And then we have them laying on the ground. And then we have personifications of dusk and dawn again. And so notice how the bodies aren't miniaturized. You think about like Near Eastern or Egyptian, they would have just made things tiny to fit them in. But the Greeks are like, we're going to think logically about this, and we're going to make it fit the storyline that there's a reason for them to sit, right? There's a reason for them to grow and get bigger in the center because they're gods, and they should be the largest, and they should be the most important imagery, right? And even dusk and dawn is awesome because there are these little horses, and it's like they're the sun rising, and so there's just a little bit of the horses popping through, and then they leave at the end on the other side. Okay, so group one had, I think, had to focus on, was that right? Do I have this right? Group one had to deal with the pediment sculptures, right? And so we have in our image set, we have Helos, Horus, and horses and Dionysus or Hercules. quite sure exactly which gods are which. And so here you can see how those figures change their shape to fit into that triangular shape. On the opposite side of the one that's in our image set, we have these three goddesses. And so this has that wet sort of clingy fabric. So I think this is all the information for those pediment shapes. Okay, now there's obviously other information we can talk about stylistically, and we'll add that to the end. But we're really just focusing on these themes. Okay, so group 2 had our colossal Athena, which we already sort of mentioned about before. For Athenian pride, once again, she is the goddess of the city, right? And she protects Athens. And how is she depicted? How does she represent the military? What is she wearing? What's she wearing? Go ahead, talk to your neighbors. What is she wearing? Okay, what are the symbols that make her the goddess of war? What symbols make her the goddess of war? Right, so she's got the armor, she's got a shield, she's got a spear, she's wearing a helmet, and then that little angel-like thing in her hand, what is this? What is that? What's the little angel? Here. It's a Nike, right? So a symbol of victory. And of course, the political significance of that is it symbolizes the defeat of the Persians. So once again, visual evidence, right? Visual evidence to support your conclusion of the theme. Right? So underneath the pediments of a Doric order, we have the triglyphs and the mythopes, okay? The triglyphs are separated into threes, hence the name triglyphs, right? Kind of look like wooden slabs that go vertically. And then in between, we have these square mythope sections, okay? And so in there, on all four sides of the building, there were four different themes of stories that the Greeks used to symbolize their defeat over the Persians, right? And so we have like lapis and centaurs, right? Lapis and centaurs. And so the focus for this part of it was the struggle of balance and military strength, okay? So the centaurs were enemies of the Athenians. So that would have been the symbolic of the Persians, right? And then the lapis, which are the humans, would have been symbolic of the Athenians. But there was also the giants versus the gods on the other side. There's all these different, good versus evil, right? Comparisons of those little square elements. Now, we can also talk about stylistically that idea of balance and order, right? Balance and order. Let me see if I can see a little bit. Here's a good example. These are the ones from Smart History, okay? When you look at the face of the lapis here, is he like terrified that he's being strangled? Not really, right? So remember that there was classical imagery always has that cool, calm, collected sort of face. And so the lapis, who is like the symbol of the Athenians, he's all cool, calm, and collected. And then the centaur, right? Who the opponent is more active and more realistic, but once again, we have that dynamic sort of action. So I might feel cool, calm, and rational, but my body is active. And then once again, the figures are shown in that classical nude. Even the centaurs. The centaurs are shown very muscular, right? They're shown very powerful. Okay, so the outside of the Parthenon is completely Doric, but the interior of it, which of course I'm missing my plan for, so I apologize. I'm going to go back a lot here. Okay, so this part right here, this inner part right here, that is in the Ionic order. So the interior section with these columns that you see on the inside with the porch and then that wall there, all of that is in the Ionic order. And so there is friezes. So remember, friezes are horizontal elements underneath the roof that are going to have a visual story. We have two of them that we researched. This is the one, the plaque of the Erechsteins is the one that's in our image set, right? So group 4 had to focus on how it represented Athenian pride. Who are these people that are displayed? Who are the Erechsteins? Yeah.
There were selected women using from the family that would be the Triglyphs that would be put on.
Exactly. So these are like from the best families of Athens, right? So that would be political significance, that would be powerful families, that would be civic pride. They were there for the Panthetic procession. So this depicts the Panthetic procession where they would bring offerings to Athena on her birthday, the clothing, the dress, and so on. And so it's done in relief. It's very logical. It's very orderly. It's very proportional, right? So it kind of has the best of the best, really beautiful imagery on it, okay? And so it's really emphasizing the Athenian people, right? Okay, so here's a close-up of it. You can see how formal it is. Look how nice and orderly that procession is. Here, we're not going to have any angsty drama, right? Because that's not what this is about, right? This is a solemn sort of religious affair, right? And then group 2 also had our victory adjusting the sandal. Now, this is not on the Parthenon. Remember, this is on the Temple of Nike Athena. And we already covered a lot of this when we looked at this individual imagery, but once again, make sure that we have this idea of how it not only, stylistically is classical, but also thinking about the themes of it, right? So she represents Athenian victories, right? She represents Athenian victories. She is a representation of military victory in particular, and of course that over the Athenians or in the Peloponnesian Wars as well. Now, stylistically, those are the things that we focused on before when we were looking at this image, right? Even though we have no head, right? We assume she's very classically proportioned, right? And then this idea that she's kind of like balancing on one foot, right? But her wings are helping her balance is kind of like the balance of, is kind of like more like contrapposto, right? Even though it's not leg shifted on one leg, it's almost like an extreme version of it. Okay, the last frieze that we have is on the north side, and this one is not in the 250. This is a series of horsemen. Who are the horsemen? Look at that, I outlined it. I highlighted it, right? These are soldiers and nobles. So they're like the male version of the Urgesines. These are the men, right? And they are also in a procession. They could be the processions in the kinetic processions. They might be a military force, right? And so this is very different. There is a sense of energy. Look at the rearing horses. Look at how commanding these Athenian men are on this horse that's rearing up, right? They're cool, calm, and collected again, proportional bodies, and so on. So we think that these, once again, were part of that procession. So in this political significance, I love the part that you mentioned about the idea that this really does symbolize democracy, right? Of course, ancient Greece and ancient Rome weren't true democracies, but this idea that people did have power, right? People could become elected officials and govern rather than having a king or an emperor and so on. So here's some just kind of blow up images of those so you can see them a little bit clearer. So you see, once again, kind of in low relief here, have like the layering and the stacking of the horses. Okay, so Smart History has a very long video if you really wanted to watch it on the Parthenon. I think it's like 25 minutes, okay? So there's also that for you there too, okay? So what are we missing, right? On the form, so you might go to the note taker page on this. Notice that the pediment sculptures are in the rim. So these would have been carved on the land and placed up into that triangular section. You can like theoretically walk behind me and see that with a horse's head. Okay, very different than the Urgesines, which are those things in relief. We've seen mostly relief up until this point in the ancient world, right? A slab of stone, carving coming out of it, right? So the friezes are in high relief. So these are in high relief. This one is obviously higher and much more three-dimensional. It's almost becoming sculptural, okay? They're proportional, which we talked about with this one already, but you could add that for these as well. So what does that mean? They look like real people, right? They look like real people. They have the right size head. They have realistic body proportion. They also have idealized bodies. These are not going to be overweight. They're not going to be old, right? They're going to be youthful and muscular, right? Healthy, athletic bodies. So either male nudes or clothed women, but you can still see their bodies kind of pressing through the fabric. The wet, clingy fabric of the women, the classical drapery, right? Notice how the fabric kind of cascades over the body in a natural way. It doesn't look fake. It doesn't look like a pattern. It doesn't look stylized. It looks like it's real. And then the cool, calm, and collected faces. That's very typical of the classical period. You probably already have that, but once again, we have contrapposto and realistic poses. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the Parthenon. Once again, I separated all of these images into the note takers so that you could really focus on a particular relief or set of pediment sculptures. So a lot of the patronage, a lot of the basic history of the Parthenon, you don't have to regurgitate on each of those pages. Really focus on the particulars of that specific imagery. So like, where are the pediment sculptures? Where do they go? What is the story? How does it relate to power? How does it relate to pride? How does it relate to chaos and order, right? Those are the things that you really want to highlight on those individual pages. Does that make sense? Okay, so that seems like a good place to stop for today. We'll start with 21 tomorrow. So if you haven't started 21, that would be your homework for tonight. Thank you for being patient. I did a lot of talking today.